Now that you're retired, maybe you'll finally stop acting like the family expert. Those were the words my daughter-in-law chose for my retirement celebration. Not after an argument. Not during some heated family disagreement. She said them while holding a champagne glass and smiling. The room went silent so quickly I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the dining room. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. I am Patricia Walker. I am 68 years old, and until 3 months ago, I spent 42 years working as a financial administrator for the same company. I had imagined my retirement would feel different. I thought it would be a season of peace. More mornings with coffee on the porch. More time with my grandchildren. More family dinners without checking emails or watching the clock. Most of all, I thought my family would finally see how hard I had worked for them. The celebration was held at my son Michael's house on a warm Saturday evening in June. The backyard was decorated with string lights. My grandchildren ran across the lawn chasing each other with glow sticks, while music drifted softly from outdoor speakers. Everything looked perfect. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, had organized the entire event. At least that was what everyone kept telling me. She had ordered the cake, planned the menu, and invited relatives from neighboring towns. Looking around, I felt grateful. For the first hour, everything went exactly as I hoped. Family members shared stories from my career. My sister talked about how I used to study late into the night while raising a young son. My brother joked about my obsession with spreadsheets and budgets. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Then Lauren stood up to make a toast. She tapped her glass with a spoon and smiled confidently. Conversation stopped. People turned toward her. She began by saying kind things. She talked about my dedication and work ethic. She praised my commitment to family. I remember feeling relieved. Maybe all the tension I occasionally sensed between us existed only in my imagination. Then her smile changed. It was subtle, barely noticeable. Now that you're retired, she said, raising her glass, maybe you'll finally stop acting like the family expert. A few people laughed nervously. Others looked down at their plates. Michael stared into his drink. Nobody knew how to respond. I forced a smile because I did not know what else to do. Years of professional experience teach you how to stay composed when a room becomes uncomfortable. Inside, however, something shifted. Lauren quickly added that she was only joking. Everyone relaxed. Conversations resumed. Music started feeling louder again. Yet I could not stop thinking about what she had said. Jokes usually contain a piece of truth. Later that evening, while carrying empty plates into the kitchen, I noticed something else. Lauren was speaking with two relatives near the refrigerator. Patricia means well, she said quietly. She just has a hard time accepting that things are different now. The moment she saw me enter, she changed the subject and smiled. That smile stayed with me during the drive home. So did her toast. Retirement had lasted less than 1 day, and already I felt something I never expected. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was the uncomfortable realization that someone in my family no longer saw me as valuable. And deep down, I suspected that was only the beginning. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar. For more than 4 decades, my mornings had been dictated by alarms, meetings, schedules, and deadlines. Suddenly, I found myself waking up without urgency. The first few days felt almost luxurious. I drank coffee on my back porch while watching the sunrise over the foothills. I read books that had been sitting untouched on my shelves for years. I planted flowers along the walkway leading to my front door. Friends told me I looked more relaxed than I had in ages. I wanted to believe them. Yet Lauren's words from the retirement party lingered in the back of my mind. Not because they hurt, because they revealed something. Once you notice a crack in a wall, it becomes difficult to stop looking at it. About 2 weeks after the celebration, Michael invited the family to dinner at a restaurant downtown. It was a casual gathering. Just burgers, salads, and conversation. At least that was the plan. Halfway through the meal, my grandson mentioned that the family was planning a vacation to a lake resort later that summer. I smiled and asked where they were going. The table suddenly became quiet. Michael looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at her water glass. Then my granddaughter answered before anyone else could. They were renting cabins near a lake about 3 hours away. It sounded beautiful. I asked when they had started planning it. Lauren finally spoke. A while ago, she said casually. We did not want to overwhelm you with details. The answer felt strange. Nobody had asked whether I wanted details. Nobody had mentioned the trip at all. I nodded and continued eating. A few minutes later, the conversation moved on. But the feeling remained. Driving home that evening, I realized something important. The vacation itself did not bother me. Families are free to make plans. What bothered me was the assumption behind the decision. Someone had decided I did not need to know. The following weekend, I stopped by Michael's house to drop off a gift for my granddaughter. As I walked through the kitchen, I noticed a printed itinerary attached to the refrigerator. Resort reservations, cabin assignments, activity schedules. My eyes scanned the page for less than 2 seconds before I realized every family member's name appeared on the list except mine. Lauren entered the kitchen carrying laundry. When she saw what I was looking at, she quickly removed the paper and folded it. "Oh," she said with a laugh. "That is just an early draft." I smiled politely. "Looks organized." "Someone has to keep things together," she replied. The comment sounded harmless. Yet something about the way she said it bothered me. On the drive home, I thought about all the years I had spent keeping things together myself. I had organized holidays, planned graduations, hosted birthdays, helped family members through financial hardships. Whenever a crisis appeared, I was the person people called. Now, somehow, my experience seemed less valuable simply because I no longer collected a paycheck. That realization sat heavily with me. Not because I needed recognition, because respect should not disappear when employment ends. A career can retire. Wisdom does not. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether Lauren's toast had been less of a joke and more of a warning about how she truly saw me. Over the next month, a pattern began to emerge. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Families change. Children grow up. Priorities shift. I told myself that was all I was seeing. Yet each week brought another small moment that was difficult to ignore. None of them were dramatic. None of them would sound shocking if described individually. Together, however, they painted a very different picture. One Saturday morning, my granddaughter Emma called to ask whether I would be attending her school talent show. I told her I had not heard about it. There was a pause on the line. Then she said something that stayed with me for days. "I thought Mom invited you already." Her voice sounded genuinely confused. Later that afternoon, I checked the family group messages. Nothing. No invitation. No mention of the event. When I asked Michael about it, he seemed surprised. He told me he assumed Lauren had already informed me. The explanation sounded innocent enough, but it was becoming a familiar explanation. A few weeks later, something similar happened again. The family gathered for a neighborhood barbecue hosted by close friends. I learned about it only because my sister mentioned seeing photographs online afterward. In every picture, there was Michael. There were the grandchildren. There was Lauren smiling at the center of the group. I was the only person missing. When I casually asked Lauren about it during a later conversation, she smiled and said she thought I might be busy gardening that weekend. The answer seemed reasonable, yet she had never actually asked whether I was available. Decisions were being made for me. Assumptions were replacing invitations. The strangest part was that nobody else seemed to notice. One evening, I visited Michael's house to drop off homemade cookies for the children. As I walked through the living room, I overheard part of a conversation from the dining room. Lauren was discussing future plans with several relatives. I heard my name mentioned. Instinctively, I slowed my steps. "Patricia probably would not enjoy that anyway," Lauren said. "She likes things simple these days." The words themselves were harmless. It was the certainty behind them that bothered me. Nobody had asked what I enjoyed. Nobody had asked what I wanted. Lauren was answering on my behalf. When she noticed me entering the room, the conversation immediately changed direction. The shift was subtle but impossible to miss. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I found myself studying old family photographs. There were pictures from holidays, birthdays, graduations, and vacations stretching back decades. In nearly every photograph, I saw the same thing. A woman deeply involved in her family. A woman people relied on. A woman whose opinions mattered. I was not searching for praise. I was searching for perspective. Somewhere along the way, my role had quietly changed. The next morning, while drinking coffee by the kitchen window, I asked myself a difficult question. Had retirement changed how Lauren treated me, or had it simply revealed how she already felt? The thought lingered longer than I wanted. Because if the answer was the second one, then the problem was much larger than a few forgotten invitations. It meant that what I was experiencing was not an adjustment period. It was a deliberate shift in how my place within the family was being defined. And for the first time, I began paying closer attention not only to what Lauren said, but to what happened whenever she believed I was not listening. As the weeks passed, I found myself revisiting memories I had not thought about in years. It happened one rainy afternoon while I was organizing old photo albums in my attic. Retirement had given me time to tackle projects I had postponed for decades, and sorting through family photographs seemed like a pleasant way to spend the day. At first, I smiled as I turned the pages. There was Michael at 8 years old holding a fishing rod almost taller than he was. There was his high school graduation. There was the day he married Lauren beneath a canopy of white flowers on a warm spring afternoon. I remembered that wedding clearly, not because of the decorations or the music, because of how determined I was to make Lauren feel welcome. She had lost her mother years earlier, and I knew weddings could be emotional. I spent months helping with planning, attending appointments, and handling countless details behind the scenes. Looking at those photographs, I remembered how often Lauren used to call me during those early years. She asked for advice about everything: budgeting, parenting, home repairs, holiday planning. Sometimes she would phone twice in the same day. "I do not know what I would do without you," she once told me. At the time, I believed her. Another photograph slipped from the album and landed on the floor beside my chair. It showed me holding my first granddaughter in the hospital. I picked it up carefully. The memory returned immediately. Lauren had experienced a difficult recovery after the birth, and for nearly 6 weeks I drove to their house every morning. I cooked meals, folded laundry, rocked the baby so Lauren could sleep. I never kept score. Families are supposed to help one another. Yet sitting there in the attic, I noticed something uncomfortable. Nearly every memory involved a moment when I had been useful, when Lauren needed support, when Michael needed guidance, when the family needed stability. I continued turning pages. There were photographs from the year Michael lost his job during an economic downturn. I had quietly covered several mortgage payments until he found new work. There were pictures from holidays I hosted, birthdays I organized, and school events I attended without fail. Looking back, I felt proud of those years. But I also began seeing something I had missed before. The respect I once received seemed closely connected to what I provided. The more useful I was, the more valued I appeared. That realization lingered with me for days. A few evenings later, I attended my grandson's baseball game. The stands were crowded with parents and grandparents cheering beneath bright stadium lights. I arrived early and found a seat near the front. During the game, Lauren spent most of her time chatting with other parents. At one point, a woman asked how I was enjoying retirement. Before I could answer, Lauren responded for me. "Patricia is keeping busy," she said with a smile. "Although I think she is still adjusting to not being in charge of everything anymore." The group laughed politely. So did I. But inside, something felt different. Months earlier, I might have brushed the comment aside. Now I heard it clearly. It was not a joke. It was a belief. And for the first time, I began wondering whether Lauren had ever truly respected me as a person, or whether she had only respected the role I played when she needed something from me. The moment that changed everything happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, no shocking announcement. Just a conversation Lauren never intended for me to hear. I had stopped by Michael's house to drop off a birthday gift for Emma. She was turning 13 the following week, and I had found a silver charm bracelet I knew she would love. The house appeared quiet when I arrived. Michael's truck was not in the driveway. I assumed everyone was out. Using the spare key they had given me years earlier, I stepped inside and called out a greeting. Nobody answered. Then I heard voices coming from the back patio. Lauren was outside speaking with a friend. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. Instinctively, I paused. "Patricia means well," Lauren said. But honestly, retirement changed everything. Her friend asked what she meant. Lauren laughed softly. She still thinks people need her advice. She still thinks everyone should check with her before making decisions. The friend made a polite comment I could not fully hear. Then Lauren said something that made me stand completely still. "The truth is, she needs us more than we need her now." For several seconds, I simply stared at the kitchen floor. The words were not shouted. They were not spoken with anger. In some ways, that made them worse. Lauren sounded calm, confident, as if she were stating a fact everyone already understood. "Michael feels the same way," she continued. "He just does not like saying it." That sentence hurt more than I expected, not because I believed it immediately, because I suddenly realized how little I knew about the conversations happening when I was not around. I quietly stepped back, left the gift on the kitchen counter, and walked out the front door without being seen. The drive home felt longer than usual. The mountains that normally brought me comfort seemed distant that afternoon. I replayed Lauren's words again and again. She needs us more than we need her now. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had stopped feeling shocked. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. For months, I had been searching for an explanation. Why the invitations had stopped. Why decisions happened without me. Why conversations changed when I entered a room. Now I finally had one. Lauren no longer viewed me as a respected member of the family. She viewed me as someone whose value had expired. That evening, I sat on my porch long after sunset. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional sound of a passing car. I thought about everything retirement had supposedly taken from me. A job, a title, a routine. But none of those things defined who I was. I was still the woman who raised Michael after his father worked long hours. I was still the woman who helped keep their household afloat during difficult years. I was still the grandmother who attended every recital, every game, every school event whenever possible. The more I thought about it, the stranger Lauren's logic became. Respect should not depend on usefulness. Love should not depend on convenience. Yet somewhere along the way, Lauren had convinced herself that my importance ended when my career did. The next morning, I woke up with an unexpected sense of calm. I was no longer trying to understand what was happening. I understood it perfectly. The real question now was whether Lauren truly believed her own words. And if she did, how many other assumptions was she making about me that were completely wrong? After overhearing Lauren on the patio, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped defending myself. For months, I had been trying to understand what was happening. Now I understood enough. The next step was observation, not confrontation. Observation. It was remarkable how much people reveal when they believe you are no longer paying attention. During the weeks that followed, I became quieter at family gatherings. I listened more. I asked fewer questions. Whenever conversations turned toward plans, finances, vacations, or future decisions, I simply smiled and let others speak. Almost immediately, I began noticing things I had missed before. Lauren seemed to occupy a special position within every discussion. She was rarely the loudest person in the room. In fact, she often appeared helpful and agreeable. Yet, somehow conversations consistently moved in the direction she preferred. At a family barbecue hosted by my brother, I watched her gently redirect an entire discussion about holiday plans. Several relatives suggested traditions we had followed for years. Within 10 minutes, the conversation had shifted completely toward Lauren's ideas. Nobody seemed aware of how it happened. The change was subtle, smooth, almost invisible. A few days later, Emma called me after school. We talked about classes, friends, and her upcoming birthday. Then she mentioned something curious. She said Lauren often described me as old-fashioned whenever family decisions came up. Emma was not upset. She simply thought I should know. I thanked her and changed the subject. But after the call ended, I wrote the comment down in a small notebook I had recently started keeping. Nothing dramatic, just observations, dates, conversations, small details. The notebook slowly filled with patterns. One Saturday afternoon, Michael stopped by my house alone. We spent several hours working in the garden together. It felt like old times. As we planted new shrubs near the fence, I casually asked about the family vacation. Michael seemed surprised when I mentioned certain details. According to him, several decisions had supposedly been made with broad family agreement. Yet many of those discussions had happened without me. Even more interesting, some of the opinions Lauren attributed to family members did not appear to match what they actually thought. I said nothing. I simply listened. By the time Michael left that evening, a clearer picture had begun forming in my mind. Lauren was not excluding me through open hostility. She was doing something far more difficult to challenge. She was shaping perceptions, defining narratives, deciding who needed to be included and who did not. The following week, I attended a school concert for my grandson. Sitting in the auditorium, I watched families filling the rows around me. Parents, grandparents, children, everyone eager to support someone they loved. For the first time in months, I stopped focusing on what Lauren thought of me. Instead, I focused on what I knew about myself. Retirement had not changed my intelligence. It had not erased my life experience. It had not diminished my ability to see what was happening around me. If anything, it had given me more time to notice things others overlooked. As the concert ended and families began filing toward the exits, I felt an unfamiliar sense of confidence returning. Lauren believed she understood my place in the family. She believed she had accurately measured my value. The more I observed, however, the more convinced I became that she had made a serious mistake. And people who underestimate others often reveal far more than they intend. The idea for the test came to me on a quiet Monday morning while I was watering the roses along my front walkway. For weeks, I had been observing patterns, listening carefully, recording details. Yet one question remained unanswered. Was Lauren intentionally shaping family perceptions, or was I simply seeing what I expected to see? I needed certainty, not assumptions, not feelings. Certainty. Later that week, I invited Lauren to lunch at a small cafe near downtown. It was a pleasant place with large windows and fresh flowers on every table. We had eaten there many times over the years. The conversation started exactly as I expected. We talked about the grandchildren, school activities, and local news. Lauren appeared relaxed, comfortable, confident. Halfway through lunch, I casually mentioned something that was not true. I told her I had recently been approached by a community organization interested in creating a scholarship fund. According to the story I invented, they wanted me to serve on the board and contribute a significant portion of my retirement savings as seed money. I described the opportunity as exciting but uncertain. Then I lowered my voice and added an important detail. I explained that I had not discussed the matter with anyone else because I was still deciding what to do. Lauren immediately leaned forward. She asked several thoughtful questions. She wanted to know how much money might be involved and whether the family would be affected. I answered carefully. Everything sounded believable because I had spent my entire career managing finances. Before changing the subject, I reminded her that the information was private for now. She smiled warmly and assured me she understood. When lunch ended, I drove home feeling strangely calm. If the story stayed private, I would have my answer. If it spread, I would have a different answer. For days later, my phone rang. The call came from my cousin Rebecca. We spoke regularly, but not often enough for surprise conversations. After a few minutes of casual talk, she asked whether I was really planning to donate a large amount of money outside the family. I nearly laughed. Not because the question was funny, because it arrived exactly when I suspected it might. I gently asked where she had heard such a thing. Rebecca hesitated. Then she admitted that several relatives had been discussing it. Apparently people were concerned. Some wondered whether I was making a mistake. Others questioned why I had not consulted the family first. After the call ended, I sat quietly at my kitchen table. The house was completely silent. Sunlight streamed through the window above the sink. In front of me rested the notebook that had accompanied me through months of observations. Slowly, I opened it and added another entry. Date, time, conversation, details. By the end of the weekend, 3 more relatives contacted me. Each version of the story contained slightly different details, but the core information remained the same. Information known only to Lauren had somehow traveled through the family. The test had worked. More importantly, it revealed something deeper than simple gossip. Lauren was not merely sharing information. She was influencing how others interpreted it. As I closed the notebook that evening, I felt neither angry nor triumphant. I felt prepared. For the first time since retirement, I was no longer reacting to events as they happened. I understood the pattern. I understood the source. And I knew that sooner or later, the truth would have to be placed where everyone could see it. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. Emma's 13th birthday was approaching, and the family planned a large celebration at Michael and Lauren's house. Relatives from neighboring towns would attend. Friends would stop by. For the first time in months, nearly everyone connected to the family would be gathered in one place. As the date approached, I spent less time thinking about Lauren and more time reviewing what I actually knew. Every observation, every conversation, every pattern. The notebook on my kitchen table had grown thicker than I realized. Looking through its pages one evening, I noticed something important. None of the entries contained anger. None contained accusations. They contained dates, comments, events, and outcomes. Facts. That realization gave me confidence. The truth does not need embellishment. It only needs daylight. During the week before the party, several relatives contacted me about the scholarship story. Some were curious. Others were concerned. A few offered advice I had never requested. Each conversation strengthened the same conclusion. Information that should have remained private had traveled through the family quickly and consistently. More revealing was how the information changed along the way. By the time certain relatives repeated it back to me, the story sounded larger, more dramatic, and more controversial than anything I had originally described. Somewhere in that process, interpretation had become influence. The evening before the celebration, I sat alone on my porch watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. Retirement had given me countless quiet evenings like this one. Months earlier, I might have spent that time wondering how to regain Lauren's approval. Now I understood something different. Respect that depends upon usefulness is not respect. It is convenience. The distinction mattered. The next afternoon, I arrived at the party carrying a wrapped gift and a calm expression. The backyard was already full of guests. Children laughed near the swimming pool. Music played softly through outdoor speakers. Folding tables held trays of food and brightly colored decorations. Everything looked cheerful. Lauren moved confidently through the crowd, greeting guests and managing details. She seemed completely comfortable. Watching her, I realized she still believed the situation was under her control. Throughout the afternoon, I observed familiar patterns. Conversations shifted when Lauren entered them. Opinions formed around information she provided. Relatives repeated details she somehow seemed to know before anyone else. Once seen, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Several times, people approached me to discuss the scholarship fund. Each interaction added another piece to the puzzle. Late in the afternoon, Emma opened gifts while family members gathered around the patio. Laughter filled the air. Cameras flashed. The atmosphere felt warm and relaxed. Yet beneath that pleasant surface, I sensed something changing within myself. For months, I had remained uncertain, then cautious, then observant. Now I felt ready, not for confrontation, for clarity. As the celebration continued, I noticed Michael watching me from across the yard more than once. His expression seemed thoughtful, curious, almost concerned. Perhaps he had begun noticing things as well. Perhaps not. Either way, I no longer felt responsible for managing everyone's perceptions. The truth had a way of revealing itself when given enough space. As evening settled over the backyard and guests gathered around strings of glowing lights, I looked at the notebook resting inside my purse. Months of observation set only a few feet away. The evidence was complete. The pattern was undeniable. And for the first time since retirement began, I realized the next chapter would not be about discovering the truth. It would be about deciding where that truth belonged. As the evening drew to a close, the birthday celebration slowly shifted from excitement to quiet conversation. Children carried slices of cake across the yard. Relatives gathered beneath the string lights. The sky above the mountains had turned deep blue, and a cool breeze moved through the trees. I stood near one of the patio tables and looked around at the people I loved. For months, I had carried questions. Tonight, I carried answers. I waited until most of the gifts had been opened and the photographs had been taken. Then I asked if I could say a few words. The request seemed natural. After all, I was Emma's grandmother. Conversations gradually faded. People turned toward me. I thanked everyone for coming and spoke briefly about how proud I was of Emma. Then I shifted to something more personal. I said retirement had taught me several unexpected lessons. A few relatives smiled politely. Others listened with curiosity. I spoke calmly, slowly, the same way I had spoken throughout my career whenever facts mattered more than emotions. I explained that over the past several months, I had noticed private information repeatedly becoming public. I described conversations that somehow spread through the family despite being shared with only one person. I mentioned the scholarship fund story. Several faces immediately changed expression. A few relatives exchanged glances. Lauren remained still. I continued. I explained that the scholarship fund never existed. It had been a simple test. Information shared privately had traveled quickly through the family and returned to me through multiple sources. No accusations. No dramatic language. Only facts. The yard became remarkably quiet. Even the children seemed to sense something important was happening. Michael looked confused at first, then thoughtful, then concerned. I reached into my purse and removed the small notebook. I did not wave it around. I did not use it as a weapon. I simply held it in my hands. Months of observations filled those pages. Dates, conversations, patterns. I explained that I started keeping notes because I wanted to understand what was happening before drawing conclusions. The truth deserved that much respect. Lauren finally spoke. She said she never intended to hurt anyone. She claimed she was only trying to keep family members informed. I nodded politely. I believed she believed that explanation. But intentions and outcomes are not always the same thing. I thanked her for being honest, and then shared the realization that had taken me months to understand. Respect is not something a person loses when they retire. Wisdom does not disappear because a career ends. A person's value cannot be measured by how useful they are to someone else's plans. No one argued. No one raised a voice. In many ways, the silence that followed carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. Michael eventually spoke. He admitted he had not noticed many of the things I described. Looking at him, I realized something important. This had never really been about winning. It had never been about proving someone wrong. It was about allowing the truth enough space to be seen clearly. As guests slowly began leaving, several relatives stopped to speak with me privately. Some apologized. Others simply listened. Lauren remained unusually quiet. For the first time since my retirement party, I felt completely at peace. Later that night, I sat alone on my porch beneath a sky filled with stars. The notebook rested beside me. I no longer needed it. The questions were gone. So was the uncertainty. Retirement had taken away my job title, my office, and my daily schedule. But it had also given me something unexpected: perspective. And as I looked out across the quiet neighborhood, I smiled to myself. I had retired from work, not from being the woman who helped build this family,